When you have a way of thinking that says, if you leave this way of thinking, you are doomed forever to eternal punishment, perdition, and fire, you're not going to leave that way of thinking because you're afraid of what the consequences are. Okay, that's one reason. That's certainly fear is what holds the Christian captive in Christianity. For me, Christianity Christianity is a myth. The gospel is revelation. Jesus is truth, but Christianity as the religion is a myth, but not the gospel. But what we have done with it. And one thing that we've done is we've taken this extraordinary message of grace and we have imported into it worldviews that don't fit with it. And so rather than the gospel actually becoming the method by which we deconstruct our worldviews, it becomes infected. And these parasites then dominate. And one of those parasites is sacrificial thinking. The gospel is anti-sacrificial in its thought because it insists that there is no transactional element between what God has done in Jesus Christ and ourselves. Grace is not extended to us because grace is not given to us with conditions. God is grace. God comes to us as one who says, I am reconciled to you. Even though you have killed my boy, I am reconciled to you. I love you. He wants us to be together. This is the way it is. This is the message. I can go into early on how all this happens in the early church, in the first century already, with the apostolic community in Jerusalem and the Apostle Paul. We can talk on that level. We can talk on the level of the second century, where the early church fathers begin to integrate the gospel with dominant Greek worldviews, Platonism, Neoplatonism, and others. We can push that into the third century and begin to see where the lawyers get involved and particularly the philosophers who are trying to create a system, a worldview. And then, of course, from Nicaea to Augustine is this solidifying in place the mistakes of the first 300 years. They cement them in, and we've had to live with that ever since until the 20th century. Now, the 20th century is a marvelous century for a lot of reasons, not just the technological advancements, not just the fact that we've managed to take the poverty level from 80% down to less than 10%. It's been an incredible century of globalization, learning how to take our industrial capacity, turn it into technological capacity, and in a sense, better the world. But it's also brought with it all of the negatives: nuclear weapons, biological weapons, the nation states at war with each other for resources, the wealth gap. I mean, there are so many things, but in this century was an event, the Jewish Shoah, the Holocaust. And it was that event which created the chasm, the abyss that Christian theology, I think, never thought it would have to cross. Because if you can't preach the gospel of the God of Jesus Christ down underneath the gates of Auschwitz, it's not gospel. And the evangelicals and the fundamentalists and so much of what goes through Catholicism and Orthodoxy and virtually all Protestantism is a God that doesn't work there, a God that makes no sense there, right? And in a sense, it's the God that Elie Wiesel was asking about in his book Night when he tells that horrific story of the little boy who's being strangled as he's being hung. And one of the observers is going, where is God? Well, where is God? And what kind of a God is God if God is not there? And how do we deal with this? And that chasm really opened up many, many things. But one thing that it brought to the fore, first of all, was the human propensity for anti Semitism going all the way back into the first century and before. It's an amazing thing, anti-Semitism. If you study the history of it, it's horrid. It's horrid, horrid, horrid. But the other thing it did was it brought into our purview the role of the victim and the possibilities of evil we never imagined. So those two things, evil on a scale, a grand scale we never mentioned, and then victims. And um, both have since become themes in all the arts and literature and movies and theology and everything else. If God is good, why is there suffering in the world? Is the big question of evil. But then also fulfilling Nietzsche's prophecy, and not prophecy, but um, his argument in his books. Christianity has become this religion where everybody's a victim now. Everybody and their brother's a victim. If you disagree with someone, you're victimizing them. If you argue with them, you're scapegoating them. Everybody's a victim, but nobody is a persecutor. So here we are at the end of the 20th century, having had these events that shape our thinking. And again, when you deal with these questions of evil and victimage, you're dealing with the character of God. And people began to realize that a God that throws people in hell, whether arbitrarily or because they piss him off or for whatever reason, they fornicated with their neighbor's wife. I don't know. I mean, it's whatever reason, this kind of a God is no different than a lot of the kind of parenting many people grew up with. And this kind of a God has two faces. He's sometimes happy with you, sometimes mad at you. And you just hope that when you're praying, he ain't been drinking. I mean, that's the God of Christianity, the God who sits up on high and dispenses judgments and justices and intervenes, evidently, sometimes with miracles, but most of the time he's too lazy, right? That God has finally it's being recognized for what that kind of a God is, the same as all the other gods. So there are several movements within Protestantism, again, not Catholicism, because Catholicism doesn't have any dogma or doctrine on hell. And Orthodoxy doesn't either. So this is really a Protestant phenomenon. And it's the Protestants who've raised the question now about, well, what happens after we die? There appears to be in Paul's writings kind of this universalist tendency. David Bentley Hart's come out in his book and shown that here it is. It's all over the Bible and the Fathers, right? So, I mean, you have this awareness that's coming to the surface for people. And then the second part is dealing with the atonement and the death of Jesus. That's the second thing that's getting deconstructed today, that Jesus' death is not about an angry God pouring God's wrath. No, Jesus' death is about the revelation of the character of God the Father as the forgiving, merciful God, not the Deus ex machina, not the God that comes down and saves the day like Superman or Batman or some other, divine hero. No, the God who makes the heavens and the earth understands what it's like to live amongst us and be nailed to a tree that he created. It's an amazing thing. So what are some of the reasons for it, for people opening their eyes today? Again, I'm just going to come back to the 20th century, kind of culminating 20th century. I mean, really, it's been an amazing ride when you look back through church history and you begin to see how movements come and go and how traditions influence others, and how 200, 300, 400 years can go by, but then all of a sudden someone will pick up a writer from somewhere in the past and reread them anew and bring real life, uh, and hope back to Christianity. I have no hope for Protestantism unless it rejects the violent God. And that includes Protestant left as well, because the Protestant left's violence is more subtle. It's cloaked in Marxist categories. And so we're just doing violence against the system. No, there are people in that system that you're doing violence to. You can't hide your scapegoats behind abstract terminology now. There's real people here. So from my perspective, Protestantism is a failure. And I'm a Protestant, and that's a terrible thing to have to say about one's tradition, but it is. And does that mean I'm going to be Catholic or Orthodox again? No, because there's way too much in those traditions that burden and weigh them down. I don't want to be part of that. I'm asking, are we seeing something new today we haven't seen before? And the answer is yes. And it's really not about God. It's what we're seeing about ourselves. And as we change the way we understand what it means to be human, then we can change the way we understand about how we perceive God to be God.